Coming up on this week's episode.
Care what the fallout of what we do is, as long as it makes us money.
Talking to a friend in education, and she had no idea what incels were.
The solution for your inadequacy is to pull other people down.
By women having agency, your lives are becoming miserable. It is 30 degrees and I'm in a room made out of wood and it's hot as balls in a linen shirt. Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of Two Please. I'm your host Abhin.
And I'm your co-host Rohit. And today's episode is probably going to be one of our more serious ones. So what we're going to talk about right off the bat, I'm not going to give some major build-up, but what we're going to talk about today is the limited series, the Netflix limited series Adolescence, starring Stephen Graham,
Owen Cooper,
Doherty,
Owen
Cooper,
or Doherty.
Again, a bunch of other people. You can look it up yourself. All of them, again, I'm jumping the gun here. All great performers. No disrespect to them, but again, the big names here are Stephen Graham and directed by Philip Barantini. Although it has been released so recently, usually we don't. Abhin and I don't really cover something this recent that's out this recently, right? But we wanted to do that because of how powerful the show is, how relevant the message is, but also because a person, an individual that looms large over this show has been in the news recently as well. We'll get into those details soon enough, but before that, let's start the show.
So yeah, Adolescence was released on the 20th of March 2024. Instant acclaim, or I even think March 19th, because Rohit texted me about this on a Thursday night, if I'm not mistaken. So it must have released on that day. And as he mentioned, stars Stephen Graham, Erin Doherty, Owen Cooper, directed by Philip Barantini, who has had a past relationship with Stephen Graham. I think they've worked on the 2021 a chef drama Boiling Point, which is about a high-end restaurant based in London on a night where everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. And the entire thing is told through one continuous take, or is made to look like one continuous take, therefore adding to the tension of the scene, where I think you could have seen a version of it in this first season of The Bear, where things go horribly wrong in the kitchen one day and things start to escalate, and they follow a similar.
I think it's the 7th episode of the first season, which is I think 18 minutes. There's an 18-minute
one hour exactly, right?
Episode. Yeah.
So if you have watched The Bear and if you have not seen Boiling Point, I highly recommend you watch Boiling Point. It's so much fun. It's a great film. But what is not fun is the premise of the TV show Adolescence that we're about to talk about. Now, Adolescence tells a story of a boy who has been accused of murdering his classmate, and the repercussions that accusation has not only on himself but his family as well as the community he comes from. And it shines a sharp lens on what the kids of today are being exposed to, and the kind of rhetoric that is being espoused in their close circles, and the kind of influences that they have in their lives, especially young boys. So I straight up want to start off with Rohit, because even on last week's episode, the one with the erotic thrillers, in the deleted section there we do talk about this. It did make the final cut just in the interest of time, but Rohit has been raving about the show for quite some time now, especially since the last week anyway. And he and he was the one who brought this to my attention. And I think as I got news from him about the show, other people who were who were in my close circle started talking about it. It started developing a lot of traction online, a lot of conversation around the subject of the episode. Some people taking it down different trajectories as expected. But just tell me how you stumbled onto this. Was this something you were tracking, or was this just a happy coincidence? You turned on Netflix, saw Stephen Graham's face, and said, "Hey, I'm gonna try that."
I actually watched it last Thursday, the day it dropped. So a couple of things. I was not aware of Stephen Graham's dramatic body of work, so I didn't know what to expect from the show. And because I watched it on the day, I preceded all the buzz and all the chatter online. So I didn't know I didn't hype myself, right? I just went in, eyes shut, just dived right into it. I did read one thing though before I started the show, which was the reason I started, which is I read that it is a collaboration between Stian Graham and Barantini, and because I've watched Boiling Point and I love it, and it said that these are 4 episodes, roughly between 45 to 55 minutes, all one take, all depicting 45 to 50 minutes happening in real time. So when I read that, I was like, cool, okay, this sounds interesting, at least from a technical perspective. So I don't know what the story is about, but I think I'll have a fun viewing experience at the very least. However, I may resonate with the themes or not. Boy, was I unprepared for the show. So what I know about teenagers in the UK, I know for a fact that there has been an increase in knife crime in the last half a decade or so, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I know for a fact that football teams are talking about, footballers come out talking about this stuff, and this is the limit of my exposure to the, or my knowledge to of this phenomenon. And then the story comes in, and the story blows, like, takes me out by surprise. But more than that, Owen Cooper and Stephen Graham. Owen Cooper is brilliant, yes, but I didn't like, it's a blank for me. It was a blank slate about him. It is his first role, so I was like, okay, standalone, great role, right? But Stephen Graham in my head was Tommy from Snatch, and then to see him in this Avatar, especially the last episode, like, I was a mess.
I know the
Right?
feeling. I know the feeling
I was a
because
mess. The last scene,
yeah,
I was watching through blurry eyes because I was not a dry eye in the
this
house.
has been a great decade for father films or media, if that makes any sense. So we will be talking about this at some point. It's so very clearly. Let me just break down the structure of these 4 episodes that Rohit is talking about. The first episode is the accusation, of where Owen Cooper's character Jamie is accused of murdering his classmate. The second episode is technically the investigation in the school, uh, which Jamie attended. The third is this psychological deconstruction of Jamie, or you are like fully given access to his inner thinking and just the kind of person that he is underneath that 13-year-old exterior. And the fourth is the impact it has on the family. The first episode itself is a bit of a hard watch, and
Yeah.
I got into this, like, I watched this on Thursday, maybe 3 days before we're recording this episode. Why? Because work, so many things. But what I did was I went and recommended this to everybody. My dad sat and finished this in 1 hour. Sorry, in like one sitting. And I asked him how it was, and he just shook his head, going, "Sha." And I said, "Aren't you glad your kids didn't turn out to be psychos?" And he's like, "At least I'm grateful for that." So is he it broke so many people. Like the reaction that Rohit has just had is, it's quite common across, like, I know a wide array of people that I know personally. And when I said like father related media, because this really shows the impact, it shows how fathers suffer. On the other end of the spectrum, you have After Sun, which has nothing to do with crime or anything of the sort, but again deals with father-child relationships, which is a film that I think maybe after a decade or so I have wept in, like completely wept. And we will get to it in a later episode. And with this episode, I too felt myself getting with this show, I felt myself getting emotional as well. So very powerful, and I think the dynamic of the one makes the tension in each episode all the more concentrated. I found
It
myself,
forces you
and
to sit in that situation with them, right?
yeah,
There's no escape. One is the oneer, and the fact that it's real time. There visually or technically there is no escape. You have to experience this real time with the characters.
I guess a lot of people were very shocked about the subject nature of this show. I was not, because, and I've been saying this for some time now. Even if you go back to our Matrix episode, the influences on not just the characters in the show, but on people in real life, is something I have been tracking for about 2-3 years now. I've actually watched the mood shift in the last 4 years, especially with the rise of what I call right-wing grifting content online. There is the rise of the incel subculture. There is the rise of right-wing fanaticism. More children under the age of 20 are right-wing than people above the age of 60. There was a stat that came out the other day in the US. And it's not just the old school version of the right-wing, conservative values, whatnot. It's a lot more extreme than that. Like if you go online, immigration is the conversation around immigration is so rancid at the moment. The conversation around women is so rancid at the moment. The conversation around racism is just, you can't even open Twitter these days, or X as it's called. So I'm a little caught up with with what the Manosphere is doing and the severe critiques it's had over the last couple of years. So the subject matter was not something new to me as it is to to most people, which is what I think this show does a very important job on, because of the sheer virality of it and the impact it's had. It's going to force a lot of people who have no idea of the kind of subcultures that exist online that kids are now privy to. So there comes a point where most parents think their kids are just like great children, and then an event unfolds which completely shocks them to this, to their core. Similarly, with what Adolescence does really well is when it opens the first episode, you look at the character of Jamie and you think this guy couldn't have hurt a fly, because
he's a 13-year-old small child, kid in his space-themed wallpapered bedroom.
Wallpaper, yeah, exactly. And as the cops burst down the door and get in and storm his room, he pees himself in his bed. Like that's
and the picture of innocence.
And there's a lot of misdirection with regards to this entire thing, right? So I am so used to, and I saw this on Reddit and I agreed with it as well. I'm so used to the idea of misdirection, of somebody being accused of a murder, of like US procedural shows where someone's accused of a murder they didn't commit, and in the end they're proven innocent. And that's the idea I went in with the first episode. Like, it doesn't help that the episode opens up with a fart joke. It literally, I was like, strange way to open up a show about teen crime, but that's probably the only humorous bit in the entire episode. After that, it starts to plumb depths that you didn't think are possible. It makes you extremely uncomfortable.
The entire show, I would say. And you in fact raised the right point, or rather a point that I did want to talk about, right? Which is how US and UK audiences or productions approach crime dramas, right? Or rather, the US favors a whodunit story more, with some subversion of expectations, some twists and turns. Which is not to say that the UK doesn't have its fair share of whodunits, right? There are a fair bit of famous ones. The first among them that comes to mind is Broadchurch, right? Again, another show that totally wrecked me, right? Which is a classic whodunit. But they also have their fair share, and this is a show in that latter category, which is a Whydunnit, right? Which is what Jack Thorne, the writer of the show, called it. It is a Whydunnit. In fact, another lens to look at these episodes is the first episode sets out the facts, right? This crime was committed. Jamie was arrested for it. And by the end of the episode, it's very clear that Jamie did commit the crime. The showrunners are telling the viewers, hey, don't try to get into the weeds of, is there a twist and there is no twist.
The thing is, you say that it's a black and white shut case, and all signs, especially from the two investigating detectives, point to that, because the detectives are sure this is an open shut case. Like DI Bascom is, throughout his whole demeanor, is like, yeah, this is done. Like this man is being accused. This is him. We have everything that we need on this guy. We have video footage. We have there's no way this is not him. But then the second episode puts a seed of doubt, because you're just like, there's a Ryan kid who's acting a little shifty, who's kind of the same build as he is, and I'm like, is it him? Because the first episode ends with Stephen Graham and Owen Cooper's characters holding each other, where Jamie says, "Dad, I didn't do it. And so there's this tiny bit of doubt, and the way shows have conditioned you for the last century or so, you're always thinking, okay, it couldn't be him. But then by the time you get to episode 2 and 3, there's the sad and shocking realization that no, it's actually him.
I mean, fair enough. I think the point you're making, which is our conditioning from watching so many whodunits with twists, allows for that line of thought to an extent. I don't disagree. At least in my case, I never questioned it. Right. By the end of the first episode, I was like, okay, cool, he's done it. Let's move on to why. Right. And the second episode actually gives you a glimpse of what is the environment outside of the house that influences the minds of children in that age group, right? And come to think of it, almost half of every day and thereby almost half of the time that the kid spends in their lifetime in those years is spent outside of the house, where the parents cannot influence the way the child thinks and accepts and processes information, right? And you see how cruel, how dysfunctional, how chaotic, how just discombobulating the school experience can be, right? Especially when you're on the threshold of from middle school to high school. You're in the not in the throes of puberty. You're on the threshold of, you're figuring a lot of things out, right? When you're 13, 14, a lot of things are happening for the first time. You are introduced to a whole new set of emotions, effectively, and navigating this is just hard in and of its own. But when you're put in a situation where there's so many external influences, and if you're on the receiving end of negativity, if you're being bullied at school, or you're struggling to make friends, or if you're ostracized for whatever reason, it makes that all the more difficult for you to come out of it in one piece, right? And again, I'll get into it in more detail. I've been through that. I didn't have the best time in school. I was picked on for my appearance. That's why I relate with the character of Jamie on many levels, right? So anyway, coming back, the second episode shows that the third episode really delves into, given the environment of the school he was in, and given the sort of influences that the online content that he was consuming uh, were present in his life, it really delves into how that has manifested in this child, right? And you can see there's almost uh, a primal fear-esque duality to him, right? There is the sweet kid, but in that same child, there is also this bitter, violent, misogynist that has been birthed because of all these influences that have been put on him. And the last episode, essentially, like I was saying, this family is struggling to be known as something more than Jamie's parents, and they want their identity to be more than just his action, right? And it's unfair to them. And the guilt that they have, parents are inevitably going to have guilt. Did we do this, right? Like, or how could we have avoided this? It really examines the aftermath of one person's actions on the rest of their family, right? That's very broadly how we could sort of break down these 4 episodes. And of course, I'd love to spend a couple of minutes on memorable moments from each of these episodes, if there was anything we really wanted to highlight, especially on the acting front, right?
Yeah.
And then we should really get into the theme, that's where I really want to get into and talk about what is so wrong with what's happening out there.
I think Stephen Graham steals episode 1 and 4 completely.
Yeah.
Episode 1 is just, he's this guy, he's just gotten from work, he's been working, he was a plumber, of fittings of some sorts, Miller's, right? And he just gets back in and he's discombobulated. He's like, hey, this is, they're clearly Liverpudlian, but they're living elsewhere. I think they're living somewhere in the south. That could be
Merseyside. No, Merseyside. It's in the Merseyside area. I read it from Kirkby. Yeah. Kirkby, close to Liverpool.
So it's close to Liverpool, essentially, because they're both parents are very Scouse. Stephen Graham himself, for the first time, is using his actual accent. So which is good to see. So he's as a dad, he's just in shock, and he's trying to process, everything, while also being there for his son, who is also in shock. His son has committed a murder, come back, and one of the first things that stood out to me was, as a parent, what is your child, a 13-year-old child, doing out by himself at 8:30 in the evening? And maybe this is a cultural thing, where I don't think as kids we were allowed to get out of the house without
I had the
supervision.
same thought.
Yeah, after 5:30. Like, there's no way in hell would you be allowed to go anywhere, and especially to the place he ends up going to see Katie.
Yeah, like this far away from house post sundown, parents say, shut the fuck up. You're coming back home.
At 10:15, if I'm out at 10:15, most nights at this age I get calls saying, where are you? And I'm turning 34 in like a month, so it's just that's the upbringing. So it initially didn't sit well with me, and I guess that's a cultural thing, because maybe in the UK parents are a little more open with where their kids are. But what really stood out to me was when they're doing like a check on Jamie, when they ask him to strip him down, and Stephen Graham's character is just like, no.
The camera stays on his face for 2 minutes, and you just see this progression of anger, embarrassment,
Helplessness.
shame, helplessness, acceptance, and then just relief when the process is over. All of this, the micro expressions on his face. I'm just like, what am I watching? I have never seen acting like that. That's why even the last episode, the part that we cut out, I mentioned no hyperbole. Stephen Graham is in the same echelon of actors as Daniel Day-Lewis is, and the names that we usually throw out, the Anthony Hopkinses and the DDLs and the DiCaprios of the world. No hyperbole. I have not seen acting like this on screen ever.
Carried that whole episode, and I just sat in my chair, and I just kept looking at him every time he was on screen, and I was looking at the kid as well, and I was like, okay, I know about, and I'd done my my little BTS research by then as to how the show was being made and everything, so I was just keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. But Stephen Graham kills it, and the one scene that absolutely stood out to me was just how cold it is, right? Like, the entire procedure is just so cold. It's people doing their jobs, and they've been so desensitized to the entire thing that there's no emotional attachment to it. Assume the same in a completely different context goes with doctors who've seen so much of death, it just stops to like affect them anymore. Similarly with people,
do you know why
like,
I'm smiling?
Why?
The other show I've been watching over the last week is The Pit, which I also messaged you about.
Yes.
And it's about ER doctors. There is an incel angle in that show as well, which I want to touch upon when we talk about it. And the whole decent and the whole dichotomy of the professionals being desensitized because they do this all the time, but the people who are brought in or who are coming in the former case, Jamie and his dad Eddie. So people who are accused of crimes, in the case of The Pit, the people who are coming in with emergency injuries, for them it's probably one of the worst times in their life, but they're interacting with people for whom this is regular. That dichotomy creates a very interesting dynamic. So the fact that you mentioned doctors, in my head, I was like, hey. Yeah, sorry.
Hey man, I think we should run a podcast. That has always been jarring for me to see, like, every single time. Like, it never, maybe because I'm not in the profession, I will never truly get it. I will never reach a point where where I'm like, okay, I understand. As a matter of fact, I actually have a story about this, a very short one, about how I actually spoke to a doctor friend of mine. I said, how do you deal with like patients who've just like families of patients who've just died? And he's like, what, they'll cry for 45 minutes. Your body can only take 45 minutes of crying. Then you get tired, and then they calm down. So you got to let them cry, and then when they're tired, that's when you talk to them. And I was just like, ouch. So
yeah, that's a very cold diagnosis of
exactly.
sorrow.
It's at 45 minutes. The body can only take that much. And I remember just being like, it's not an evil thing to say, but it's just so he's thinking purely from a medical perspective. Like
Yeah,
it's just he's just, and I was like, oh, I guess that's what it takes. And I had another family member of mine who was working in oncology and who is interning as an oncologist, and he said the lack of empathy I see in this department is really getting to me. I want to be a doctor that leads with empathy, and that's what he's made his entire profession about being one of the best oncologists in his space while being empathetic. And that's because he was just so shocked by the lack of it everywhere. But more importantly, coming back to the show, the cold natureness and the cold cuts between each bit of information being revealed was quite uh, intense. And the final nail in the coffin where um, Bascom is essentially playing with the solicitor, who's also there because he's been asked to be there. So he's just like, yeah, are these your shoes? These are Nike Air Maxes. This is it. And as he reveals the bread trail of like the breadcrumb trail of evidence, and finally says, and I think DS Marsh, who is his colleague, is about to reveal the video ace's weight. He gives them more time. He gives the father and he gives Jamie more time to confess, and he doesn't. And then eventually he pulls out the laptop, presses play, and gets out of the room.
And this is again where, second moment in the episode where Stephen Graham shines, right? You can see disgust, disappointment, shock, all of that, and he's holding it in until everybody else leaves the room and it's just him and Jamie in it. He's just barely holding it in. You can see he's sniffling, and there's the whole tidal wave of emotion which he's holding in. The moment they all leave, it's just them both. He starts crying and he asks Jamie, "What have you done? What have you done?" And the first time when Jamie reaches out to him, he recoils because that is that disgust and fear. Like, this is a person who has murdered somebody. And then he goes back to hold his son because all said and done, he's his son. It's, my God, beautifully written and just exceptionally performed. Exceptionally performed.
Yeah.
Here's something else.
Great first episode. The second episode, I think, is probably the weakest in the series.
Yes.
Purely because it has a lot of explaining to do. And I think any episode that has to deal with a ton of exposition, it's not like it's explaining stuff to characters, but in reality, it's explaining stuff to the audience. So as the two detectives go to investigate the school to uncover what really happened, they are informed about the Andrew Tates of the world, about the blue pill and the red pill, cultures that exist, and generally like how kids react with each other. You have Jade, who's clearly troubled, comes from a troubled home, is now dealing with the loss of a friend. It's kind of hinted that they may have been more than friends, but we don't know yet. They don't really like explore it. And Ryan, who is this shifty character, who's clearly knows something, who's Tommy and Ryan, I think, are his two friends. Ryan is the one that is accused, or rather, is the one that gave him the knife, and he thought he'd scare her. And they still, as far as I know, they don't find the murder weapon. It's still.
No, but I see carjacking in Ryan's future. He just seems like that kind of shifty guy.
And it probably has a supreme. I think this is, from a technical perspective, a great episode. This episode will come back in the theme section because I don't really want to talk much about it because this will feed into themes. But
you're right. This is probably the most technically adept episode. Technically, the best episode. Thematically, probably contributes the least. Third episode is exactly the opposite, in my opinion. Technically, probably the easiest episode because it's shot in one room. So, in terms of camera work, staging, blocking, it's easier. But thematically contributes the most.
I think episode 2 sets up the themes and episode 3 builds on it. Like, episode 3 does not exist without the explanations in episode 2 about the various cultures.
Also fair.
Because then you're like, okay, incel, we hear incel subculture, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it, I understand. And then you move on. I will explain what incel subculture is in the themes. Please bear with me. But episode 2 exists purely as an explanation to parents, is what I would assume, or rather to like people who don't know what's happening.
It's more of this thing of, hey, if you're confused or if you don't know where your kids are getting it from, this is where they're getting
This
it
is
from.
there's
Please
a
keep
spot
an
for
eye
you to
out
check.
for this. Yeah.
So and then what happens is we get to episode 3, and I'd heard a lot of things about episode 3, and I'd heard that this is like the point of this is probably one of the best episodes of television you'll ever see, and it's basically around 2 characters, a forensic psychologist and the prime accused suspect, who's now been in this security center for about 7 months. And she's brought in because Jamie got violent with another inmate, and she's been brought in to do some sort of a psyche eval.
Also, I think her evaluation helps the judge determine the severity of his punishment. I think that's the larger context. Because he's a minor, they also need to understand, does he know the gravity of his actions? And depending on his degree of understanding, they decide the degree of severity of the punishment.
Apparently, this episode was the first time Owen Cooper was ever on a TV set.
Yeah, this was the first episode to be shot.
Yeah, which to me is absolutely insane. This guy, they found him on some sort of council estate. He was essentially in a theater group called the Drama Mob. He was attending theater classes once a week, and then he came and auditioned, and apparently he was so good. Stephen Graham turned to Jack Thorne and said, "This is the guy. This is the kid." And you see it unfold, and this isn't just the best episode of this series. This is one of the best episodes I've seen. Like, as much as I love episode 1 and how it just unfolds, episode 3 is a real deep dive into this guy's psyche, right? And it's just the pure sense of, it's almost like a horror movie at times, because the forensic psychologist is just in shock, because from the outside in, she's here to evaluate someone, but she sees a sweet, innocent child, and as she starts to probe, she starts getting some sort of pushback. It starts with a sandwich about pickles, and then it delves into masculinity, and then it switches to the murder, to Katie, who's been murdered, and then it starts to, and then it escalates, and it drops back, it escalates once again, and you're just, as a viewer, you don't know what to expect next. And I think that is probably, for a TV show that has already revealed the whodunit aspect of it, and as you rightly said, the whydunnit aspect of it makes for extremely intriguing viewing.
No, in fact, again, I won't belabor the point too much because I want to save it for the themes bit. But what you see under the surface of what's happening on screen is a power struggle, right? Who is owning the conversation? Who is directing it? Who is in charge? The entirety of the episode is Jamie chafing against the fact that he's not in charge. And because of the reasons we will get into in some time, he is unable to accept the fact that a woman is driving the conversation and he has to listen to her, right? That is something he's not okay with. And he keeps trying different tactics, manipulation, intimidation, and just winning favor. All of these tactics to try and be a little more in charge of the conversation, because he sort of derives his self-worth from being able to be in charge.
Yeah, and
at least in the context of that conversation.
And I think also what really stuck out to me was how this is the case of incels everywhere. They all want to be recognized, to be validated. And when they're not validated, they lash out in the worst way possible. And you see this cycle repeat.
Yeah.
Where he gets angry the more she doesn't validate or doesn't make him feel loved. And when he gets angry, he lashes out, and then he's like, "Oh, but you still like me, right? You still like me. You think I'm a good guy, right?" And then again, when she doesn't say anything, again he lashes back out, and again he falls back into the same pattern. This is classic incel behavior, and that's the scary aspect. And there are, as you're going through the episode, it also kind of highlights that Katie herself is some sort of a femcel. They don't really go into it because she's got her own issues. And but what is really scary is that they essentially distribute topless pictures of her. And the reason that Jimmy wants to ask her out is because at that moment when she's like obviously being subject to ridicule, she's at her weakest, and that's when he thinks she'll agree to go out with him, which again is the classic power dynamic that exists with that kind of subculture, where they're just like, you
Yes,
need
and
to bend women to your will, and when they're at their weakest, you offer a hand of support, and they will stay with you forever.
which is what I want to discuss in more detail. So I'm
Yeah.
withholding myself from diving into this point, right? I really want
Hmm.
to tie it into the larger fabric of uh, toxic misogyny and the incel subculture. But that's exactly the dynamic, and all of these are at play below the surface, right? So, and again, watching not just this episode, or either not just reading about people talking about this episode, but in general, people talking about the show as a whole, really makes me sad for state of media literacy and online discourse, right?
Oh, dude,
So
wait for themes.
yeah, I'm just gonna
Just do it.
hold on to this
Just
point.
do
And I
it.
was so irritated. People are not disliking the show for the randomest reason. I'm like, guys, are you fucking stupid? Anyways, I'll hold on to that. But coming to the last episode, which, full disclosure, was actually my favorite episode, even more so than
Yeah.
episode 3. I understand why episode 3 is stellar, right? But again, this is my point of view. If I were to watch this show 10 years ago, it would not impact me as much as it did today. Because we are at that age where most people are having kids, and whether you have one or not, your mind, whatever the kind of thoughts and concepts you're exposed to, you are a lot more empathetic with that sort of sentiment, right?
You're
Which
not
is why
even.
when
I would so far go as to say you may not have kids, but this is probably the age where your maternal and paternal instincts kick in. So, or rather,
yes,
have been. You're in the middle of this right now, where you're just like you're protective of people, and especially like you
I
may
was
not have
skirting
children.
around saying that term
Yeah.
because I don't want to say that I'm feeling paternal, but yes,
Hmm.
that's pretty much it.
I was like,
I'm
hope
sort
your
of
wife
trying to
doesn't
not
listen to
say
this episode.
it. Yeah.
Uh,
Fucker.
okay.
But yeah,
I said it. It's fine.
yeah.
Mm.
So you start feeling that, right? And therefore you empathize with those sentiments more. Some generator in the background has decided to randomly wake up.
It's okay.
I'm sorry if that's yeah. Especially the second half of the fourth episode, right? The first half is a study of, like I said, the impact that Jamie's actions have had on the family and how they're struggling to deal with it. Uh, they're trying to have a good outlook, a sunny outlook at life, and Steven
I'm
Graham's
trying to
character
move
says,
on with it's his birthday.
yeah, it's his birthday, and they're like, let's grab the day back. Let's we'll go do a trek. We'll have lunch, and it's almost this forced happiness, this happiness that they're forcing out of themselves, right? Like, we have to make ourselves be happy, otherwise we won't be happy, right? And just a quick shout out here to the daughter's character.
Lisa.
Her degree of her degree of empathy, like in the supermarket when he has that interaction with that, again, what looks like an incel character who's trying to sell him the paint, right? And then you see there's this almost like muting of sound, and he's again lost in that space. You can see his daughter immediately clock that, and she's like, "Are you okay, Dad?" I was like, outstanding empathy, right? She's so tuned into her parents' body language, and she's so quick to catch on that something's off. So just wanted to shout out beautifully written character. But anyway, coming back to the point, the first half of the episode is um, is how they're still trying to, pick themselves up. But then there's the whole development that happens. This bit I don't want to spoil, because even though it's a Whydunnit, that development, I want people to experience the punch of that, right? So I won't spoil it. But something happens which again puts, a spanner in the works. Everyone's in disarray, and it sort of makes things a lot more final for the family. Until then they were living in some limbo of hope, but that last bit of hope is snatched away after this development. And the second half of this episode, when the mom and dad sit down and they dissect their parenting and where they went wrong, and they talk about the child that was, there's one snippet where she talks about he used to have this some food item, chocolate or something, all over his face. Oh man, that it's just, yeah, it's a lot.
It's as
It's a lot.
it's just watching it, and I think parents struggle with decisions their kids make, and this could be a very like a myriad of things, right? This is as somebody like in the US, I'm sure people struggle with like parents of school shooters. In some capacity or the other, are always wondering, what did we do wrong? Like, where did it go wrong? Like recently, the two accused murders in the UK and kind of what the show is based around. Again, there's lasting impact on them in the community. And I said this to somebody the other day. I said, as we were discussing the show, growing up, my parents didn't know what I was watching. But to this day, they don't know what I watch or read online. I think you need to self-patrol your own, your content. You need to be able to understand that, okay, this I would not venture into so territory. Your parents give you the boundaries, and it's your responsibility to not cross them, or rather, or not find loopholes in them that you can access. For the large part, I think we're okay. But then again, it really comes down to, I'm sure we are extremely cultured, and I'm going to talk about this in the themes, or rather privileged. I wouldn't even say cultured, extremely privileged to be in the state that we're in. Because when we get into the different aspects of how this is affecting people across different regions, I'd like to bring this up. But parents will always see their children, no matter how young, old, as their children. And the one thing that, and as this sitting there reminiscing about the boy they knew and not the boy that is accused, or rather that committed this crime, they're unable to find signs that showcased that connection happening. They don't know when he turned. They're
really struggling to make the two Jamies make sense.
Yeah, they're like, this is our son, this is a loving son. A lot of school shooter parents say the same thing. He was loving, he was sweet, he was a little disconnected, didn't have friends, got bullied in school, so on. But then we never saw this coming. I think even the mother of one of the Columbine shooters, Dylan Klebold's
mother has spoken a lot about this.
Yeah.
One of the two Columbine shooters,
yeah. So it's very difficult for a parent to be able to, and we're not exactly the right people to talk about, because neither of us are children. I'm not even married. So, but the whole, but you understand, you're at a point now where you see parents as people, and I think like you see them trying to fulfill a lot of roles, and while trying to understand their kids and trying to be the best version of themselves to their kids is something they are really attempting to do as much as they possibly can. And when it goes horribly wrong this way, it just leaves, like, there's no coming back from it. Like, your life is forever changed. There's that there will always be associated pain. Similarly with parents of kids who've committed suicide, their life will never be the same. It's just from what I know of, parents are always wondering. You get stuck in a loop where, like, what did where did I go wrong? Should I have done this?
What
You're
could I
just
have done
survi-
better? What should I have
survival's
done
guilt.
better?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
exactly the two questions they ask each other, right? Could we have
Yeah.
done something more? Should we have done something more? Could we have helped him? Yeah, there's never an answer for this question. Forget black and white. There's no gray answer. You're not going to
You
find an
do
answer.
you do what you can and hope the chips fall as they may.
Yeah, and like it just makes me all the more scared to have kids. Right? I have enough
Yeah,
reasons to
yeah,
be
for
worried with
sure,
the way
for
the world is
sure, dude.
going. Climate change and all that shit. I'm like, I have to worry about this also. Like, it's terrifying. And the last episode ends with what is probably, I wouldn't call it my favorite scene. That's a slightly morbid take, but it's probably the best acted scene, in my opinion, of the entire. Keeping Owen Cooper's entire performance aside, right? But for me, the most impactful acting, where again, for whatever reason, and either he wants to be a strong pillar of strength for the family, or because he has his own twisted version of masculinity. Stephen Graham's character doesn't really let all of his emotions loose in the presence of his wife and daughter, right? He still holds himself back to a degree, but once they go down and he walks into his son's room, he really processes again the information that I'm not going to talk about. He really processes the gravity of that information, and he just it all comes out of him. And this scene, his performance in this scene is again one of those times when I literally superlatives fall short for how he has acted. That's all I can say.
I'm not even going to like add much more to that because I think it needs to be seen. I think as much as I'd love to discuss it, I don't think I'd be able to even match the sheer amount of emotion in that one scene alone. It's just heartbreak. It's pure heartbreak. And yeah, there's literally nothing I can say. It's just I remember just sitting in silence as the show ended, credits rolled, and I just took a deep breath and went, okay.
Yeah, I was thinking of it makes me well up again. It's that impactful.
Definitely, yeah. If you must see the show. It's important you see the show. I don't say this about like things about media. That is, I never say that it's important to watch this for this reason. This is important, especially if you're choosing to have kids in this setup.
Yes. If you're choosing to have kids, you need to know, or even if you have kids who are now in their infancy or 5-6 years old, this is important viewing for parents, because please right away be proactive, make sure your kids aren't exposed to this shit, so that they turn out to be good eggs.
If you have young boys. I think that's most important, and we will get into the theme section of it. The entire show is built around the premise of the impact of online media and incel culture. The rise of edgelords, prime edgelord being our man who runs Twitter and another car company, as well as has a department in the US office at this point. He is one of the few people responsible for the sharp increase in fanaticism over the last 2 to 3 years. I'd say by the time, there is an older episode of ours that we did on the Matrix where we spoke about the red pill and the blue pill. So the red pill essentially consists of people who believe that they're breaking the barriers the so-called system has locked them in. These are people who say, fuck the norm, you're step outside the matrix, do this, do that, bring back conservatism, things were better in the 50s and the 60s. Essentially say some rabid shit and are very toxic and extremely misogynistic in their beliefs. What they have been able to do is they've been able to weaponize male loneliness and turn its target towards two specific people. One is being the existing systems that are in place, which are built to keep you down, and the second being women, because they believe that by women having agency, your lives are becoming miserable. If women have choice, your lives become miserable, because they refer to it this as well, the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the women all over the world are attracted to 20% of the men. So, and they are attracted to them purely for so and so materialistic reasons. And incel is essentially the short form of involuntarily celibate. So these are people who want to have sex, but they can't have sex because women reject them, or because they just don't find themselves in positions where they're able to approach anybody
Stick it
about it. Okay. Wow, Rohit. Anyway,
I'm trying. This is a serious episode. My inherent nature is to
I know.
negate seriousness. It's my
I
defense
applaud you.
mechanism.
I applaud you
It
for
rears its head.
Yeah. I applaud you for your strength this episode,
Yeah.
and your self-control. So, incels essentially dominate the online space. They are primarily people who stick to themselves, play video games. I am under no assumption. I am making no assumptions that all video gamers are incels, because that would make me an incel. I'm not an incel. I'd like to think I'm not.
I'm not an incel.
Yeah, come on, guys. Anyway, but essentially, it's that culture where people are just stupidly protective of the echo boxes that they build, echo chambers they build for themselves, and blame everything else on women and on the systems I mentioned. And in part, as I mentioned, tech has had a huge part to play with the rise of this, because when Andrew Tate, who is now kind of considered the front runner of the space, became huge on social media, through sheer marketing genius, the man was able to get in front of all our screens. And if you saw maybe 2 or 3 of his reels or shorts, whatever it was, and the algorithm would recommend more of his stuff. And it just so happened that he became a worldwide phenomenon in the space of 2 years, before he was arrested for sexually trafficking women in Romania, where he currently is. And I thought that would have been the end of it. But what happened was, with the rise of Andrew Tate, you also had a bunch of other people that came up alongside of him. Chief among them are your Fresh and Fit, who essentially run podcasts where they get a bunch of women, some OnlyFans models, some sort of dancer women, and they just shit on them for 4 hours, or 2 to 4 hours. That's their whole thing. And they have a whole Bible on what it is to be a man, how women shouldn't vote, how immigration is bad for them. It's essentially right-wing grifting, and it's a very stupid, but so much so that it's now come to a point where I feel like they actually believe what they're saying. Initially, I looked at it and thought, hey, okay, this is clearly a grift to get views and to be controversial. Now I think they're very much within the fabric of it. It is absolutely insane, and I think even though he's not right wing, Joe Rogan is considered to be a part of this movement. Guys who consume Joe Rogan, people voted for Trump purely because of Joe Rogan. And I think there was a magazine that did, or rather a publication that did, a breakdown of the number of content creators that are online, and the most popular ones are all right-leaning. And not just right-leaning with the way, with old school conservative values, which I mentioned earlier on the episode. It's the right-wing leaning with extremist views, like Nick Fuentes, who is a known Nazi. The day Trump was elected president, he came out, and he has a whole community of people called gripers that are racist, that are homophobic, that name the worst aspects of human beings. They're probably the community, probably promotes in some capacity or the other. But what I remember was, the day Trump got elected, he got on camera and mocked women and said, you lost, we won. Your body, it's the my body, my choice narrative that had come up in the whole Roe v. Wade debate. He went he took it in another direction and said, "Your body, my choice," and forever, and that went viral, and it felt like it's still to this day. Like even if I go on Twitter, or even the most remotest of things, I just find myself completely inundated with these assholes I don't even follow. They're just clickbait merchants who just are just trying to promote uh, some random shit that gets them views, and as a result influences a whole generation of children, especially in that age bracket that we're talking about.
No, I completely agree. In fact, if I were to try and so what you spoke about better than I could have put it across is how this is playing out, right? And what are the dynamics at play at the heart of the incel subculture? And again, for the most part, this is happening outside of India, outside of where you and I are staying, which is not to mean that in India we don't have misogyny, right? It's just that in Western civilization, things were improving and now they are regressing. We have been in the pits, so it's like yaar, pit mein hai, pit mein hi hai, right?
We're
So,
recording. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're recording this episode 2 days after Supreme Court Justice has come out and said grabbing of a women's breasts is not enough for it to be classified as rape. That's where we're currently at.
yeah. So for us, there is no regression when we have not progressed only, right? So all of the other factors, again, I'm not going to get into detail because I value my life. All of the other factors, the non-misogyny aspects of what you spoke about in the last 10 minutes exist here, right? And misogyny has always existed here. So I'm guessing those troubling tendencies, which a lot of people in the in the upper half of our country didn't need Andrew Tate to come in and tell them. They're like, "ये तो हमें पता था यार."
Reinforcing.
This is not any. Yeah, they're like, "Oh, ये बंदा अभी सीख रहा है हमसे," right? So again, I'm not going to get any further into it. So this has always existed in our country. Where all this comes from is the insecurity and the feeling of inadequacy that exists in the kind of people that gravitate to these movements, right? And even in the case of Elon Musk, an example that you started with, if you listen to or read about his biography, you can see that his dad withheld so much love from him growing up that he had a strong feeling of inadequacy, a strong lack of being loved and need for being loved, right? And what happens is when you're feeling this need to be liked, the problem I have with the content that the Andrew Tates and the Tatelings of the world are putting out is that the solution they are giving to you, the solution for your inadequacy, is to pull other people down with you.
Yes,
right?
exactly this. Yeah.
Make them feel inadequate, bring them down to your level. And when they feel as self-loathing or as inadequate or as insecure about themselves, that's when they will, they are a suitable, or they'll see you as a suitable man. Self-improvement does not come from bringing others down. Like I said, in fact, I have mentioned this before. Up until the time I came to engineering college, I didn't have great friends, and and from the time I moved to Dubai till the time I had good friends in Dubai, but whatever. From the time I moved here till the time I was in college, I did feel lonely for a good period of the time, right? And I am not crediting myself that I could pull myself out of it self-worth wise. I am saying I was lucky, right? I'm not crediting, I'm saying I was lucky. I wanted to look for ways of self-improvement, chief among them losing weight. There was this 15-year-old kid running for an hour at home so that he could lose weight and feel less shitty about himself.
That's how they get you. Like, and that's
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the point I'm coming to, right? Even if you want to do something positive to improve yourself, if I was this today, right, and I go on YouTube Thankfully, I didn't have YouTube or Instagram algorithms in my in the early noughts when I was going through this. Today, if I'm looking at gym videos, right? Gym videos are a gateway to Andrew Tate content, man. I'm like, what
Yeah.
the fuck? How does somebody get out of this? Somebody's trying to do positive self-improvement and you're still fucking them.
It's insane. It is absolutely insane. Like,
Fuck these algorithms for doing that, right? And what
there
is
is
happening
only
is
yeah.
it's this capitalist shit at play, right? For all you know, Tate sort of content is paying these platforms to say push my content onto people who are searching for these search terms. We both work in marketing. We know how this works, right?
Yeah, no, we know. Yeah, exactly.
And these companies are like, hey, we are just, and that's what they say, right? They act cute saying we are just a platform. We we are democratizing access to content, and who gets served what is not something. Fuck you. You know you can pay and push your content. Go fuck yourself for saying that in public. And this is what happens, right? Even if somebody wants to improve themselves, you guys are not allowing them to do that, right? Because it serves the capitalist needs. And Andrew Tate, for that matter, is running a hustlers university where he has a $39. I read on this, right? He has a £39 sign up fee where he tells you how to make others feel inadequate just like you so that you can feel a little bit more loved. And he's making money off of your insecurity.
Which is what people don't get. Which is what people just do not get. I think that you spoke about media literacy a while ago, and it's just people just don't understand that. Just look, pay attention. This is a moron that is like motivational speakers aren't accused of sex trafficking. I think that is the barrier. That's the bar. Sorry, that is literally if I am taking advice.
The bar is in the gutter, by the way.
Oh my god! And I am just like, this is a known sex trafficker. He ran webcams. His whole business is come off exploiting women. It is media houses have him on because controversy sells. The most important aspect of everything from television to social media is controversy has always sold. Why does
Piers Morgan have this version of capitalism, right? Where it's like, we don't care what the fallout of what we do is as long as it makes us money. What the fuck? What sort of world are we living?
It's not going. It just gets. We have abandoned morals and essentially just thinking at this point. Yesterday, Trump was thinking of disbanding the Department of Education.
Yeah,
just like, what is like, and this is from a man that sat in a Cybertruck and said, "Wow, this is amazing. Everything is computer," and we are just like, most powerful man in the world, most powerful man in the world, right there. So it's just it really puts things into perspective about where media literacy is and why people will just not listen. And right now, it's the entire subculture that we're referring to is like a lighthouse shining a light, guiding ships into the rocks. Right? You are essentially guiding misguided souls. It's a siren call. Is just what I'm trying to say. It's a bunch of people. It's like a bunch of these guys online blaming everybody but yourself for your problems and just reinforcing that behavior. They take a select few examples of women and then they just make that the generalization, which is why we are currently the way we are. I was talking to a friend in education and she had no idea what incels were. And I said, you're in education.
Please educate yourself.
You need to watch adolescents and you need to pay attention to the kind of things that are being said. It's not like she doesn't know. She has a close friend whose son is in the 15-16 bracket and is very influenced by the Tates of the world. He's Indian. And it's not just him, his entire batch is of that sort. And there was a point where she asked me and another friend to go talk to him so that we'd be able to tell him that this is not how things are. And that is yet to happen. Because it's just the moment I found out, I was like, you know what, we need to make this like it needs to be heard from somebody in our age bracket. And I think
He
that's our
needs to be
responsibility.
deprogrammed because he's clearly being programmed.
Clearly, and it's not because kids these days, the first relationship, they have 3 relationships in as soon as they're born, with their parents and with an iPad. People are put iPads or like any sort of tech tablets are put in hands of children because parents are just so overwhelmed to begin with. And if you're able
Yeah.
to get a child early, and if you're able to like become a strong part of their formative years, then there's no shaking that foundation. It's deeply
Yeah.
ingrained into them.
You're part of the more fundamental neural networks.
Hmm.
It's very, it is very bleak, and it feels hopeless. But I sort of want to end this in this episode on just a message to two sets of people, right? One are the parents. Again, this, like we said, we do feel parental in this age, paternal in this age. So the first part of my message is coming from that sentiment, and I've given this a lot of thought. This show has stayed with me. I've been thinking about this show every day, right? It just refuses to get out of my mind. So from all of the thoughts that I've been having about the show, uh, I just want to tell parents, hey, first, like, fundamentals, please make sure your kids feel loved, right? Please don't knowingly or unknowingly withhold love, because you do that right off the bat, the odds of them not turning out great increase dramatically. That's step one. Please show them and emote your affection, right? Make sure they know they're loved. But given like a case like Jamie's, that alone is not enough. The second part is be a lot more aware, educate yourself, know what's happening out there. Unfortunately, in this case, ignorance is not an excuse. Please know the sort of language, even if it feels like you need to wade into what the Gen Alpha lingo is. Even if it all feels alien at first, please get into it. So, in case you see your child engaging in this sort of nomenclature, you can catch it early. But also, again,
I'd like to point
yeah,
out here a couple of things, some keywords to keep an eye out for. If they ever refer, I mean, this is the most basic one. If they ever refer to women as whores, there's your first sign. If they speak about guys as I do want to be a beta male, that's your second sign.
yeah,
Feminazis, third sign. Cucks, fourth sign. Just keep an eye out for a bunch of these things, right? They're just the nomenclature is common across the board. I will probably in the description put out a list of words and stuff to keep an eye out for. But just make sure, just adding to Rohit's point, I just want to make sure that you are aware of what's happening, and it's important that you have a discussion with your kids about the opposite sex, and you speak to your
yes,
children
yes,
about what it means to be a boy if it's a boy, what it entails, what it does not entail, and most important, that women are not objects and
yes,
should never be objectified. You must treat,
yes,
this is so important because nobody ever tells you any of these things. The things you learn by yourself. You need to understand, kids need to understand the repercussions of sex, of what it has, of the mental and the physical things that come with it. This is, if you are not comfortable doing it, use a counselor, use a psychologist, whoever it is, to explain it, or use just somebody that the child is comfortable with talking to. It's integral that you do
yes.
this.
But yeah, this sort of positive, not reinforcement, positive enforcement is definitely necessary. You tell them, uh, at least give them a rule, some rules of thumb on what sort of what sort of trains of thought are wrong, right? So if they encounter it, they know, hey, this is not something to engage with. And the last point, again, this is my opinion, people are free to agree or disagree, is be honest, like open with your kids and say, hey, it's not that I'm doing this from a lack of trust. I trust you, and I will believe you when you say it. But up until the age of 18, I want to have some degree of oversight in terms of what you're browsing, right? and I will put in a few controls, not because I don't trust you, but because until you're a certain age, your brain is not capable of critically analyzing the pros and cons of what you're watching, right? You're a lot more gullible, and that's something that there is no workaround. You have to go through that growth for you to be able to analyze these things. We can have all the conversations we want about it, but I don't want you to engage with this content in an unsupervised manner. Even if it is a supervised manner you want, we can watch it together, right? I'm not going to deny you that content. Let's watch it together, let's discuss it, and then if you still feel a certain way, at least I have done my part in trying to dissuade you from it, right? After that point, if your kid is going to turn out a certain way, at least it's a very small consolation, but at least you can say I tried everything I could, right? It wasn't that I was ignorant of it. Do that, right? And then these are things I want to tell parents. Now, coming to the other message I want to give, which is to people not just 13, could be any age, right? Feeling insecure and feeling inadequate does not have an age bar. But if there is anybody here listening who is feeling things like this, who is facing difficulties on this front, I want to tell you, I have been through it, so I understand, and I know what it feels like on some days to look in the mirror and hate what you see. I know what it feels like on some days to feel that you deserve to feel the way you do. And on the flip side, I know what it feels like on the days you feel happy to feel that you don't deserve to be happy. I've been through all of that, right? And it is with this understanding and empathy that I'm saying the answer is not to drag somebody else down with you. The answer is not to find company in misery, right? The answer is to try and pull yourself up. Yes, you will face challenges along the way because of the cynical way in which the world we interact with is constructed. If the world sees people trying to pull themselves up and it tries to drag them down, right? But the only way to self-improvement, the only way out of inadequacy is self-improvement. Now, the form of that self-improvement could be different things, right? For me, it was physical fitness. Once I got fitter, I started feeling better about myself. And as superficial as it may sound, the fact that I felt better and the fact that I felt it was okay to feel better about myself, that sentiment was validated by somebody. Today I'm married to that somebody. But I found that not everybody is fortunate enough to find that. But please persevere in the belief that the only way out of feeling insecure, feeling inadequate, is self-improvement. It could be physical, it could be mental. I don't know what self-improvement means for you. Maybe you need to have a sit down and have a think about it. But please don't think that, making somebody feel as bad as you is going to make you feel any better. It is not.
I'm not going to add anything more to that. I think that's a good way to end it. If I were to add one thing, surround yourself with people who are inherently good people. I think the circle you keep goes a long way, because you want to be surrounded by folks who will call you out on your bullshit, who will not act as an echo chamber. I think this is extremely important, and that's what the biggest problem with the incels is, that it's an echo chamber. When there are voices of reason, you will be able to pull yourself out of there. And then self-improvement is just you surround yourself with good people, inculcating good habits, and working on just yourself. It's not going to be an easy process. There will be ups, there will be horrible lows, and there will be days where and for the most part, it is not your fault either. Just these are circumstances. The best that you can do is just navigate it through and come out the other side a better person. And don't get vitriolic about it. I think that's important. You should come out of scenarios without spite, because that spite is self-consuming. Before you know, it's directed at everybody, and it starts to just slowly erode at everything that you have about it, inward. And then there's nothing left of you. You're just a shell of the person that you were, just randomly shouting into the void. Please be careful.
Yeah.
That's the episode, guys. If you made it so far, please subscribe to the channel. We'd really be really helpful. If you haven't seen Adolescence yet and you've made it so far, strange person, please go watch the show and then come back and watch this. Probably make a lot more sense. See you in the next one. Next week's episode is a little more light. It's actually one of the first few episodes we recorded post our break. It's on sports movies. That will be out next week. It's a nightmare to edit because of various videos and audio issues. That'll be out next week. Until then, see you. Take care. Have a good one.